Hi, Mike. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, welcome back. You already put the picture on LinkedIn, so I'm allowed to talk about it. I don't even have to get your permission to bring it up, but you've got some personal news.
Yeah, had a little baby. So just got back from paternity leave, had a little baby girl. I've got two boys, 8 and 7, and now a little girl joining the mix. So she's going to run the show. I can already tell.
Yeah.
She's captured everyone's hearts. My older two boys just absolutely love holding her. So it's been a fun last 4 weeks for the Wieger household.
I think we need to talk about your paternity leave too, because it was so different than what I normally hear. So tell us a little bit about what you did for the last month.
You know, when you have two older kids and then you're going to be spending a bunch of time with a new baby, you don't want to forget about the older ones. You want to make sure they're having a good time too. So my wife and I and our whole family is a big fan of the outdoors. My wife loves to be outdoors if she can. So we decided what better way to all spend time as a family than to camp as much as we can.
With an infant.
With an infant, yes. So it was glamping, if we want to be. It was in an RV. So, but we went to the state parks and did a lot of camping. And me and the boys got to do our fishing and playing in the lake and swimming. While Hannah had a nice place to hang out with the baby. And then we all came back together and had a bunch of family time. So it was by far the best month of my life. It was absolutely amazing. Fantastic. Yeah.
I was blown away when you said you spent the last month fishing, like tropping around the woods and hanging out with the boys and your new baby girl. So,
yes, she's, that third kid gets kind of just drug along to things, right? So we're starting that early. She's just along for the ride.
I love it. Well, welcome back. We're
Thank
so
you. Glad to be
back. And really glad to get back into Know Your Worth. It's been a month, obviously, since we recorded. So we were chatting earlier today. This is a topic that maybe gets a little bit more technical, but we'll keep it pretty high level.
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Today I think we really want to focus on is the anatomy of a deal. I think it's really good when a seller fully understands how a typical deal structure might look, right? What are all the different components that go into the deal structure? And I think because it's good to know all the options, because when you are thinking about your ideal scenario post-sale, you might have a few things that are really important to you. So understanding the levers, we call them levers, right? These are certain levers we can push and pull on in a deal structure. What are those levers? How do they function? For the most part, across the industry, there's some pretty standard levers, right? Mm-hmm. There's some creativity that can also come along with these deals, and we'll talk about maybe a few of those things that get asked as part of the deal structure. But for the most part, there are some basics that you need to understand. Then we'll kind of jump into maybe some of the more creative ones that we see too.
Yeah, and I think we're going to try and be as generalist as possible. So obviously you and I, different sides of the same coin.
Yes.
Your deals are mostly our partner offices that are looking to transact. Mine are all external partners that are usually going through a process. So we'll use kind of a broad net to talk through this. But I think in general, we're going to talk about kind of the three main buckets, 4 if we count compensation. And then 5th, we'll kind of talk about some of the weird stuff we see too.
Yeah, we are. And I think really where you and I differ in this is I'm working with all of our partners who are already part of the Carson network.
Right.
So this conversation that we're about to have is actually a conversation that I have with a lot of our partners. Mm-hmm. Because for the most part, they're not represented by a banker in that scenario, right? So there's not someone that's guiding them through the process and doing that education.
No, you are.
I am. Yeah.
You
so
are
I'm in a very unique situation where we are the buyer, but I'm also trying to provide some of that education because I want all of our partners to have a really good experience. I want them to go in eyes wide open. Mm-hmm. I want them to ask good questions. I want this deal structure to be as ideal as it can be for them. In order to do that, they need to fully understand all the levers that we're about to talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So let's dig in. So 4 main areas, right? I think that we would typically talk about are compensation. So how am I getting paid? Because obviously when you value a firm, it's all the top line revenue, subtract out all the operating expenses, subtract out compensation. That's bottom line EBITDA or cash flow. That's what you put a multiple on and then assess the value. So there's compensation. We talk about that. Let's talk about what upfront consideration is and how often or how much that typically is. And then we'll talk about the contingency payment. So what is a retention payment and what's a growth earnout and why are those important?
Yeah, so we want to start with compensation first.
Let's do compensation first. Yeah.
So I'm curious on your side. When it comes to compensation, I think one of the biggest challenges for owners to start thinking about compensation is this is probably one of the first times that they're looking at their own compensation in the terms of maybe a payout or what is base salary or some of those factors. For the most part, as an owner, you might pay yourself more of a guaranteed rate throughout the year, but as the owner, profit distributions are a big thing, right? You're pulling a lot of that as compensation. that model changes when you sell your firm.
Right.
So I think one of the first things we should talk about is, in general, that's just going to be a mindset shift of what you are monetizing, what you are selling, is that profitability. So now the compensation structure might just look and feel a little different than it was before, but it's still going to be a number and it's still going to be a structure that should still incentivize you, make you excited to get up every day. As you continue to grow your business post-sale, your compensation should be structured in a way that it continues to go up. And so I'm curious, on your side, is that conversation something that you're having with the seller? Is that something that the banker's typically having with them?
Yeah, yes and no. So I think it's really interesting you talk about profit distributions versus guaranteed minimums, because I think that depends a lot on the size of the enterprise.
Yes.
So smaller firms, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but just smaller teams, generally they're making their money by taking all the profit distributions out of the company.
Right.
When you get larger, more sort of sophisticated, 20, 30 people, then you start seeing more of where they're paying themselves a salary. Yeah. And then there's some sort of mechanism for profit distributions, whether that's reinvestment into the company or whether that gets distributed pro rata to the owners.
And that's probably due in part to, as you get to that size, there's typically more than one owner.
Exactly right.
As you're scaling up, you might have one, maybe two owners.
Right.
A little bit easier in that regard. As you get to that scale, you might have 10 different owners. So it's going to look and feel a little bit different.
And I would say growth rates tend to be steeper for those larger firms. So they're reinvesting quite a bit back into lead generation or technology or investments or all the things we do as well. So there's less of a concern about sucking the profits out and more about reinvestment. But yes, that conversation around the mindset change, that happens almost every time. Yeah. So if they hire a banker, they're usually pretty well coached. Like they know what they're selling. It's not just the book of business, but it's the cash flow of the enterprise.
Right.
So it's not as much about how the mechanics work, but it is still a conversation around what is the appropriate level for them to feel rewarded? And then what do we feel comfortable with them going to their significant other and having a conversation around a drop in cash flow? So, because there are two sides to this, right? I mean, we have advisors that say, hey, I want to make $1 million a year in my compensation. That's fine. We can do that. It just lowers the valuation because it lowers the cash flow we can bid on. But on the flip side of that, every now and then you get the advisor that says, I want to work for $1, put that all into the valuation, load it all up front. And we can't do that, obviously, because they get hit by a bus or lo and behold, they want to take their hard-earned retirement. We got to hire somebody else.
Yeah.
We need compensation there so that we can go out and replace them. So that's replacement level cost. But there is still a conversation usually around what do you want to make? And what is going to get you motivated, not only to service the book that you already have, but to go out and grow additional.
Yes.
So normally we try and accomplish that through a payout percentage.
Yes.
Not a salary. Salaries are great, but salaries are static, generally speaking. What we would rather do is just I think a simple explanation. Let's say there's $1 million in gross revenue. One owner advisor says, I need to make $300,000 in take home. We would convert that $300,000 into a 30% salary.
Exactly.
That becomes a percentage of gross revenue then that they take home every year. That way, if existing clients contribute new assets, they get paid on that. And then there's usually a separate percentage for any brand new clients that they bring in.
Exactly. And that's why I love the revenue share as compared to the base salary, because it grows with you.
Exactly.
Right. Grows with that back book and the future book. I think that is really important. One thing you highlighted that I think I really want to kind of hit on too was there is the consideration of replacement cost. And I think a lot of sellers always ask, well, why?
Well, yeah. What does that mean?
What does that mean? And it means from a buyer's perspective, if that person is going to step out of that role in retirement or for whatever it might be, you're still going to need to pay someone to do that. And so having a good amount of healthy compensation in there for whoever you would need to bring in to perform those duties is still necessary. And so I think that's really important. And then I'll probably say this a few times in this conversation. In deal structure, everything is a scale, right? And the scale tends to need to balance out.
Right.
So if we pull from one area, or if there's something that's really important to the seller and it's a little more aggressive on their side, they're asking for something, if it's bringing it down over here, maybe we have to lighten something up over here. So there's a scale. Compensation is a really good example of that because, again, we want them to be comfortable. We want them to continue to live an amazing life and that compensation to be a good reason to wake up in the morning and to continue to do their job. But they know that as they increase that, to your example in the beginning of how we calculate EBITDA, EBITDA's going down a little bit. So it's this balancing act of more guaranteed compensation, a little bit less in value, or vice versa.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's a great conversation to be having.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong. Folks are still selling the same thing. They're selling the underlying cash flow of the business. It's more around, what do you want this to look like 3 to 5 years out? Do we have the right G2 talent in place? Is there comp that we can shift to them as you move out so that they're incentivized? Because the last thing we want to have happen is a really great G1, sell the business, start scaling back, step out. The G2 does not have appropriate compensation, and now they feel like there is no future for them, or their growth of their income is capped because there's not enough comp built in.
Yeah. So compensation's an interesting one, right? Because it's going into the valuation calculation.
Yeah.
But once we have determined that and we've had the conversation around compensation, again, we talk about, revenue share being a really good way to do that, growth of the back book, growth of that they're going to have after close, all counting towards that compensation. So we've had that conversation. We kind of get down to this EBITDA. We've talked through a valuation number that's there and that's both sides are agreeable to. Let's break down how, so if we have consideration, right, let's say we have $10 million in total consideration going out, how is the rest of that deal structured? Right?
Yeah.
What are the different components that we need to talk about? Now, all these are intertwined, right?
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes we still have to go back and revisit compensation after we get to some of these conversations. But how is that typically broken out?
Yeah, so what's left is what we would usually refer to as the headline valuation, or headline enterprise value. There was actually a great article in, I think it was Wealth Management just yesterday, a few of our partners. So John Orsini from Marshberry, Jess Polito from Turkey Hill, David DeVoe from DeVoe & Associates. We're talking about headline valuations and what does that actually mean? Are you getting what you think you're getting, and how's that sort of broken out? And I think they raised some good points, because I do think when we talk about all three of those components, whether it's upfront consideration, a growth payment, and a retention earnout, those all make up the value we or a buyer is willing to pay.
Yes.
But only one of those is guaranteed. The other two are not. They're earned. So that's the way that, as you put it, buyers and sellers share risk in the transaction.
Exactly right.
So let's start with upfront consideration. And I think this is also a chance to highlight how closing works, because we do this a little bit different than some of our peers. What is more common in the marketplace is a two-stage closing. So generally what happens is you sign the purchase agreements, you sign employment contracts, you've decided to transact with the company, financial due diligence comes back okay, and you pick a date. So let's just say January 1st. That's the day you affiliate with the new firm. You then have a threshold where a certain amount of accounts or assets need to transition into the new firm. And once they do, then you close on the transaction, and that upfront payment is released from escrow. So then you would see that. So it's a two-stage close. We don't do that here, at least in the external market. And I think that's a competitive advantage for us. And there's a few reasons why we don't do it that way. But the way we do it is we have the purchase agreement and the employment agreements all sort of agreed to. We affiliate, we close, and we release the upfront consideration all on the same day. Yeah. So we are having a conversation to say, welcome, you're the newest member of the Carson Wealth family. So happy you're here. By the way, can you confirm that the wires went out and you see the upfront consideration in your bank account? Also, positive consent DocuSigns are going out to your clients right now, so we're going to keep an eye out for them. The reason we do it that way is, so far, we have never had, one, a signed LOI that has not closed, and two, we think it's okay to share that risk. We've never seen a buyer that has failed to hit that retention earnout, and we're really proud of that. So it's okay putting the dollars in the seller's hands on day one. Amount, generally speaking, on the external market, it's always north of 50%. Usually, if it's a competitive process, we're seeing 60 to 70% of the total headline valuation going out the door on day one in the upfront consideration.
I think I completely agree. I think the important piece there, as you said, like, this is the one component of the deal structure that is guaranteed.
Yeah.
Right? When you are getting that money. Now, in the two-stage process, there's some triggers that have to happen for you to get that. But in our process, that is the guaranteed amount.
Right.
So again, going back to this scale, I think from a seller's perspective, keeping in mind when you are going through this process, before you even have that first conversation, have a list of 1 to 3 things that are the most important thing for you in this process?
Yeah.
Is that timeline of receiving your funds? Is that eliminating a little bit of the risk as we go forward? Is it compensation? Like, right, what are these things that are going to be really important? Is it, I still have a lot of growth potential, so I want to be handsomely rewarded for that growth, right? I want a larger portion in that growth. I want a lot of upside. I hear different things from different advisors depending on what stage they're in. So highlight those, because as we go through the rest of these components, again, these are all levers.
Yeah.
Right? Is it 60% or is it 70%? Or is it lower or is it higher? Depending on where the other levers shape up, that is what determines where we're at. So I think that's really important. It's the guaranteed portion. So that leads us into then the retention earnouts.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about those.
Okay. So first I'm going to go back. You're talking about those points. One of my favorite quotes. So Alan Darby from Alaris Acquisitions, he calls them mandatory points of alignment. And I love the phrase because I think it perfectly captures what you're trying to accomplish. There are non-negotiables both for the seller and for the buyer. Those all have to align. If they don't, there's no reason anybody should be doing the deal. But there are other things that are nice to haves. They're not have to haves. And those are where, to your point, there's a lever and ways to change that. Okay, retention earnouts. So this is where we start protecting ourselves a little bit as the buyer. So it's a mechanism where we can make sure that essentially the revenue we bought is still inside that company and that it's still present and we're getting the value we purchased. So here at Carson, it's a pretty vanilla approach, honestly. We don't get a schedule of the clients or strip out market or bifurcate by lead source. It's essentially, this is the gross revenue we bought. Is it all still there? So at the end of the first year, we're doing a look back and there's a target revenue number. If you hit it, you get it. Yep. There is a scale down, so you don't it's not an all or nothing thing. If you do 80% of the revenue, then you can qualify for a portion of that payment. But as I had mentioned, all of our firms are hitting their revenue targets. So that's just you can add new clients, you can raise fees, you can tread water, you can ride the market, you can get new contributions from existing clients. It all kind of goes into the same bucket. And as long as the revenue's there, we release that retention payment. Yeah. So that, generally speaking, is, call it 15 to 20% of the total consideration that we're putting together as that headline valuation, generally.
I think it's important too, because when you have retention, you have to have some sort of metric to measure that on. Right?
Yeah.
So typically you're going to have what we call target revenue.
Yep.
Right? In target revenue, you're typically looking at where was revenue leading right up to closing.
What did you underwrite for?
What did we underwrite for? How did we value the deal?
Yep.
And then is that still consistent in that first 12 months?
Yeah.
And this is where I do think it's important from a seller's perspective, having that in mind, that, okay, as I'm negotiating and as I'm trying to figure out my revenue figures, and you talk about trailing 12 versus run rate, all those factors, whatever revenue we do decide on for underwriting, that typically does carry over to the target revenue for the first year.
Yeah, we should dial into this because this is a great topic. You're so right. And I think that's where really an investment banker earns a lot of their keep is setting proper expectations, underwriting a fair deal, and then we accept those adjustments to the P&L, and we're putting something in place where, one, they have a realistic shot at actually hitting those targets. Yeah. And two, we're comfortable that the revenue we're buying is actually going to pull through.
Exactly. In 99% of cases, it's going to work out just fine. Right? What we underwrote it for. But here's just a quick example from a seller's point, just a watch out. So if you are a seller, and let's say you brought on maybe two of your absolute largest clients you've ever brought on in the past few months, and you want the deal valued on a run rate basis, right? So we're going to annualize some of that revenue that came in. Well, a lot of times if you are going to look forward like that, if you had a kind of a one-off event, or if you had, just a stellar quarter that you might not have again, just everything was aligned, if you make that then the go-forward assumption, it can be a little bit hard to hit that.
Yeah, that's exactly right, yeah.
Right? So just...
This is, again, the levers.
The levers,
the valuation
right?
on a higher base means you have harder targets to hit.
Harder targets to hit. And this will actually tie in even more to growth.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But retention is still, you have to look at it in retention too. So just knowing that what revenue was underwritten for carries over to be the target. 99% of the time, that's perfect, right? Because they're going to continually hit. In our industry, that revenue is pretty sticky. It stays there. With the markets, hopefully it's going up, and you have the ability to even grow beyond where your target revenue was. Yeah. But it's just an important point to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, so third, we're going to talk about growth earnouts.
Yes.
So this is the final piece. So call this the last 15 to 20% of the total deal consideration. And this is a fun one. So I was at the DeVoe conference, I think 2 years ago, participating on a panel, and I made the comment that there is no such thing as a growth earnout that we don't want to pay, because they are always in everybody's best interest.
Yeah.
But it's a way to add additional valuation and incentivize the right behavior, which is organic growth. So the way that typically works is that's a further out payment. At the end of the third year, we are measuring their growth rate, again, using that target revenue figure, and we're holding them to a CAGR. So have they grown a minimum usually of 5% year over year for those 3 years, up to, generally speaking, 10 or 15%. Now, this is harder to hit. And I'm going to quote another friend of Carson. So Peter Campagna at Wise Rhino has kind of talked about, just in the spectrum of things, what he sees is sometimes, call it 10 to 15%, folks are going to knock it out of the park, qualify for the utmost tier of that growth earnout. Roughly 10 to 15% of the time, folks are not going to hit any one of their growth earnouts. Everybody else is going to fall in the middle.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, you can land somewhere in that range that we're laying out, of roughly, again, 15 to 20% of the total consideration. Some folks are going to get all of that. Some folks are going to get right in the middle. Some folks might not get any, but generally speaking, you're gonna land right there in the middle.
And this is where I'm going to go back real quick to your first explanation, which was perfect on headline price and headline value. I think it's just important that, all the sellers know that when they're reading all the articles and they're reading about valuations that were put on certain firms and multiples that were paid, that almost every firm in our industry structures their deals with this same general structure.
Yep.
And part of the headline price is going to be the growth component.
Yeah.
And I think as long as you're aware of that going in, it level sets expectations on when you're trying to plan out.
Yeah.
You have a number in your head. Just know, okay, is the number in my head when I'm thinking of what I want to get from my business, does that include me growing for another 5 years, or is that my number just for the business as is?
Right.
Right? Where does that number, so that if your expectations are set, it's a much easier negotiation process. What I don't want to happen is I don't want it to be a shock that, a portion of that headline value for all the offers I'm getting from all these different firms, part of that is always in growth.
Right.
It's part of the headline price.
Yeah, and knowing that that's a huge reason people do M&A. Because I think it's worth noting, and I've gotten the question before, okay, if you're writing a deal, let's just say you're doing 10x adjusted EBITDA, theoretically, that's a 10-year break even, right? Because you're giving away or you're buying 10 years of profitability for the firm. So just as a financial advisor, if I were to go to any advisor and say, hey, would you ever recommend a mutual fund to one of your clients that says, hey, 10 years from now, you're going to get your principal back with no return? They'd say, you're out of your mind. You're crazy. I'd never invest in that. So why do we do M&A? There's 3 reasons really you can make money out of it. You can synergize the business, which is a terrible word, but the idea is essentially people are going to lose their jobs. You're going to cut a bunch of costs, do something to increase, maybe artificially, the cash flow. That's not what we do. We are buying talent. We're bringing that talent on. 2, you can jack up fees or try and drive revenue. We also don't force that on our advisors. So we're going to bring that grandfathered client fee schedule in as is, and then kind of work together on something new. Or 3, you grow them out of the multiple. So you take a firm, you take somebody that's maybe growing at 2% and say, we can get you to 5 or 8 or whatever it might look like. And we're at 8% across the enterprise right now. So let's get them to 8%. And that 10x multiple isn't actually a 10x. You're buying it down because obviously EBITDA is rising through the next 3 to 5 years, and we're getting some return on our investment.
Yeah, bringing that 10 years down as short as possible.
Exactly.
Right? So with growth, can that 10 years now be 7 or 6 or 5?
Right.
Whatever it might be. Yeah,
right.
Completely.
And then that's where the sweet spot is, because we want the growth earnout to be really attractive for the advisor. It's got to be meaningful. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're writing a check for $50 million and the growth earnout is $1 million, that's not going to do anything like that. That's nominal on the total valuation of the deal. But when you're talking about 10 to 20% of the overall consideration, that is meaningful, and the advisor wants to hit that. And I think we do a really nice job too of structuring it to where we're kind of climbing the mountain with the advisor. So listen, if you hit 5%, you're going to get something. If you hit 6%, you're going to get more. If you hit 7%, you're going to get more, rather than say, hey, there's cliffs here. And if somebody is sitting at 7%, they have no shot at hitting 10, the last thing I want them to do is just take their foot off the gas and not try.
Right. And I think the growth component is just one area I always tell people, focus in on that a little bit when you're comparing offers. If you have multiple offers in front of you and you're looking at them, it is such an easy thing to crank up the growth portion to show a very high potential.
Right.
But that might be completely unreasonable.
Yeah.
So you say, hey, man, I have a $10 million offer. I have an $11 million offer. This one's willing to pay $25 million.
Yeah.
I would make maybe an assumption that how they're getting to that 25 is with a very high growth target that might not be attainable, right? So you might fall in, and when the dust settles, you might have gotten 11 right around that same number that all the others were at. So it's just an area, as we talk about sellers and being educated, being prepared, it's something to look at and read the fine print on how all that stuff is calculated. It's really important. Yeah.
It's I think we do a nice job of showing what does this deal look like in present value. Like, what are the real numbers that we're talking about? And let's use today's figures when you're kind of determining whether this is a good deal for you or not. I had a situation, and I'm not going to use any names, but they were talking with not a typical aggregator or integrator. And this firm was showing them a spreadsheet of their compensation and the growth earnouts, growing them at 20% year over year for the next 5 to 10 years. And yeah, if you show somebody that and say, this is what your compensation is going to be in 10 years if you grow 20% year over year, yeah, that looks amazing, but that's also extraordinarily unrealistic. And I think that's really disingenuous to show somebody, because the vast majority aren't going to come in anywhere close to that.
Right.
I mean, we have a great office, again, not using names, that when they joined us, they made a comment. They said, this is our best year ever. We're growing at 12%. Do I think we can do 12% every single year? Probably not. Maybe. We're going to try, but probably not. So know what the deal is in today's value. Maybe not looking, 5, 10 years out.
It's the reason, Michael, that I love how transparent we are here at Carson.
Yeah.
Right? And how we're not going to try and do that. We're trying to be very reasonable. Now, to your point, though, there's no set, everyone's willing to pay for the growth component.
Oh, yeah.
So if, for example, if you showed someone, hey, here's the breakout, here's the upfront, retention and growth, and they said, okay, I think we can maybe outperform your growth component, you're more than happy to say, we can show you what it would mean if you blew those out of the water. Like, we are happy if that happens.
We have an office right now. I can't bring their name up. They're under signed LOI, but I've been describing them as a force of nature. And that was exactly what they said. They said, I'll see your 15%, show us 20. I was like, you got it. Like,
happy to.
We will put that in there. We'll go to 25%. Like, just if you want to get out there and just really ring the bell and grow this thing, we're happy to support you.
Right. But on the flip side, we're not going to go in and show 25% to every single opportunity we talk about to try and get a really high headline price.
Right.
We're going to be reasonable. And we love it when they come back to us and say, challenge us more.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, if your historical growth rate's 2% or 3%, it would be, I think it would be a little bit ambitious to think that you're going to hit 20% year over year for the next 3 years. But there are firms out there that do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there sure are.
There are. And I think so just, I think that lays it out really well. I think a few things that, if you wanted to dive in even deeper and get more technical, or if the seller out there listening to this is looking to do more research. You mentioned CAGR for the growth component, right?
Yep.
Compounding annual growth rate, just understanding how that works. On retention, kind of.
That's, that's a great point. We had an occasion where the advisor thought that it was sort of like an aggregate or a point in time. So making sure they understand this is minimum 5% year over year. You're growing that each year on a new base.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a really good
retention,
point.
right? When does the measurement period start and stop? We already talked about target revenue being really important to understand. Market-driven events, does that affect retention? What goes into that? Compensation, exactly how it's structured for both the owner and the whole team.
Yeah.
Really important. And I bring this up only because almost every single deal in our industry will have flavors of what we just talked about, right? They'll usually have those components of compensation, upfront, retention, growth.
Yep.
Now, the details of all of those will be drastically different. There's a lot of different ways to calculate everything we just talked about. So going in, making sure you're understanding, utilizing your legal counsel, your banker, whoever it is, to just fully understand the difference It can be the difference too between two offers that maybe look different from a headline price, but maybe the lower one is actually better than the higher one,
Yeah.
or vice versa. You never know, right?
Right.
So just understand the details, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's again going back to that article. David was quoted in there, and I've heard him say this before. The whole like, you name your price, I get to name the structure. You can say this is what I need to get paid, or this is the multiple I want, but that means it's going to come with a lot more handcuffs or restrictions around how that gets paid and when it's paid and what you have to do to get there. And there have been some deals in this business that you and I have both seen that are heavily structured. The firm leans really, really strongly into that multiple. It's flashy, but I think the advisor, once they start digging in, realizing what they have to do to get there,
Right.
then it becomes a little bit less attractive.
Completely agree. Okay, one final piece that we haven't hit on. It's a little bit somewhat tangentially related. Rollover equity versus cash.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about this deal structure, I think a lot of firms right now are utilizing equity and having that in play. In general, what are you kind of seeing out there, and what component does that come into? Is that part of all three, just one? How does that work?
Well, it's a great question. So I would encourage every seller, and we get asked this question quite a bit. Like, what's the one question I should be asking that I'm not? Ask about ownership structure. Like, understand who's on that cap table,
Yes.
what the goals are for the partner, how much is still majority controlled internally versus being sold off. I think those are key aspects because they directly drive equity performance.
Yeah.
So for us, I think generally speaking on the market, you're seeing anywhere from usually 20% up to, in some cases, like 40% of the overall consideration being paid in equity. And it's buyer equity. And for us, it's a double-edged sword. So it's our most expensive form of capital. We're growing like a weed. So the equity obviously is a very valuable piece for us to use. But we have a floor. We like to see a minimum of 20% of the overall consideration being paid in equity because that shows alignment.
Yes.
And I want as broad a pool of that as possible. Frankly, if the owner says, I'm going to get all of my staff members onto the cap table and I want them to have rollover equity in Carson, fantastic. That is alignment from the get-go. Everybody there is going to be an owner and behave like an owner. Sometimes we'll see them maybe sell at a discount to some of the G2 advisors right before a transaction closes because the G2 wants to roll that equity over into ours. But we kind of negotiate on how that all works. We had one deal that ended up taking like 49% of the overall consideration in equity. You talk about alignment, like they are like full steam ahead. I'm actually talking to one of them at 2:00 today. So all they want to do is talk about growth and pushing forward. I would also say it's important you do like reverse due diligence with your new buyer on their equity. What does monetization look like? How often can I? What's the next event look like for your private equity backer? All of those things can change depending on the holding period and depending on your own sort of financial planning goals as you consider taking equity.
Yeah. What are the next 3, 5, 10, 20-year plans for this firm? And how is the cap table going to change at each of those events, right? During that time? A lot of firms have different plans for how they're going to grow and what the exit strategy is for the founders and all of that. So I completely agree. The reverse due diligence is extremely important. And I think the reason I bring up the upfront equity, the rollover equity, is because, again, from a planning perspective for these sellers, it all goes back to having expectations and having those expectations that are met. So if you have a number in mind, did that number include part of that not coming to you in cash right away, but instead being equity that you are going to monetize and liquidate at a future date? Right. So it's a lot about planning, expectations in your head. We all know that when you have something in your head and then it doesn't come to fruition, it can be disappointing. So just having that expectation, knowing that a lot of buyers are going to want some rollover equity as part of the deal is important.
As they should.
Stage. Yeah.
Because the bet you're making really is that portion of rollover equity will outperform your own individual equity in your firm also some other vehicle in the market.
Yes.
So that's why I think it's so important to know the firm that you're talking to. If they're going to give you equity, is that going to grow at 20 or 30% per year, or is it a dog? I mean, is this something that you could beat by going out and buying a mutual fund or an ETF? So really understand what it looks like, because the ideal situation, which is generally the case for most of the really good RIA firms in our space, is it's going to beat the market. I mean, it's going to outperform what you're doing right now, and it's also going to outperform just the general S&P. You asked about percentages or when that's paid. So 99% of the time, that equity is all a part of the upfront consideration.
That's what I see as well.
I mean, the easiest rationale for that is we're not gonna stop growing, and if you defer that into the retention or the growth earnout, you are essentially diluting your ownership and diluting the value in it. So most of the time, advisors want that as much upfront as they possibly can.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's in their best interest, right?
Yeah.
Because you're getting the price per unit at that point in time,
Exactly.
versus waiting on that growth
Right.
and getting it in a retention, earnout, or in
Yeah,
the growth component.
we've
Yeah.
done 16 transactions here today. That's a lot of transactions. That's a lot of price adjustments. The last thing you want to do is take it after the 16th transaction and then have to look back and go, man, I could have got it at this price.
That's exactly right.
So last question, I guess, before we go, what is one of the maybe the weirdest or most unique wrinkles to a deal structure? It could be something on the P&L that they wanted us to cover. It could be some really inventive thing that you did in getting something into the deal, but just anything that comes to mind immediately.
You know, in general, maybe this isn't a wrinkle, but I would say what it is a wrinkle that comes up more often than not, and it's around compensation for the team. And here's why. It's well, you know, you're having the conversation, you're doing the valuation, you're getting down to that bottom line EBITDA, and then the conversation comes up, well, 8 of these 15 people actually need raises. I've been meaning to give them raises.
Last minute.
Yeah, last minute. Or, you know what, I've been trying to change their compensation structure, never got around to
Right.
it. And that's not it's something we can handle, right? We can deal with anything. But that is a hard time to do it.
Yeah.
And so just having the compensation conversation and being realistic about it, I see that we get to the valuation, we get to a EBITDA, we're all agreed, and then we're diving into employment agreements and some of those for people. And then it comes up, well, we should probably bring that person up a little bit, or this person. And all of a sudden,
A
our
founder
adjusted
promised
EBITDA,
me a raise.
Exactly.
I never saw the raise.
So what we
Yeah.
underwrote for is changing. And again, it's something we can have a conversation around it, and we find ways to pivot. But that wrinkle comes up a lot. And so I think the fact that we talked about compensation and understanding it is really good, because you do want that ahead of the underwriting process if possible.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. We want people to be well compensated. We want stickiness and retention
Exactly.
for the
Oh, yeah.
staff members. But we also want you to be upfront about it and do that before we put a valuation, because theoretically, if you're changing compensation after we've already presented a deal, our EBITDA is changing, which theoretically should result in a price change or a valuation change. And you never want to do that. I mean, that creates incredible ill will towards the seller and the buyer.
Yeah. Can I add one more?
Go for it.
I guess so. It's not really a wrinkle, but it's just something that is becoming far more standard that advisors are asking for. So especially with my existing firms, you know, we have a strategy called AQR that our advisors love to use. So one of the biggest things individuals are asking for is, let's pretend we're closing a deal next month. We're closing it in September. They're asking for a portion of the upfront to actually be kicked into being paid next year.
Yeah, we saw
so
that
from
too.
a tax
Yep.
perspective, they want that full year to work
Right.
with tax loss harvesting and the AQR strategy and those sort of things. So it's actually interesting. It's, hey, I know it's supposed to be upfront, but can we kick out some of that payments to receive it into the next year? So things that we're getting asked to kind of move when those payments happen is typically some of the
Like
things
you
we're seeing
talking
today.
about AQR Flex just gave Sonu, wherever he is right now, like a big smile. Like you're going to make his day. The fact that it's going to be on the live stream today.
Oh, it's huge. The partners who know how to utilize that
Oh my gosh.
have been extremely successful with
Yeah.
their clients, with themselves. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. So a real quick story before we have to go. So Greg Womble, one of our new partner firms, he came in Omaha. We did a visit, and we, as part of the home office visit, we're talking about AQR Flex and why this is important, how it can mitigate the tax liability, especially for a seller, whether it be a financial advisor selling his firm or one of his clients that is selling a business. And great visit. And then I get in my car, I'm driving home. And as I'm driving home, Michaela was at the front desk. I get a phone call and she goes, hey, I got Greg Womble on the phone. He wants to talk to you again about AQR. I go, patch him through. And he goes, Michael, I'm going to meet with a client tomorrow. I want to make sure that I know enough to be dangerous. Can you set something up with Sonu again so that I'm ready to go and I can meet with this client and have a conversation around it? So it is a really exciting strategy. It's complex. It's transparent but complex, as Grant Engelbart says. But it is a unique feature. I think at least when we start talking to M&A for an advisor, hey, there are ways to lower the liability on the sale of your business if you plan appropriately.
And just, I've said this on previous version of our podcast, having Sonu and Ryan there to have those conversations and, empower and arm our advisors to have those types of conversation. It's a complete game changer. Game changer.
It is. I had a call just the other day with a prospective seller, and he goes, I know exactly who Ryan is. I follow Ryan on Twitter. It's like,
do you have
so
any
Ryan's
wrinkles that
watching
you
us.
see? If we flip the question around, anything that
No,
you've seen
I mean,
that's been interesting?
it's usually it's the P&L stuff. Like every now and then you see these random items that are maybe not adjusted out. So like NFL Red Zone as an example is in the budget, or we had one occasion where a seller we agreed to pay for NBA season tickets for a period of time. It's like, okay, like we can do this.
It's marketing, right?
It's
Yeah.
marketing.
Yeah, it's marketing. Yeah.
Exactly. So no, it's more stuff around that rather than like actual wrinkles late in the game. I've seen the compensation thing for staff though, unfortunately. And then there's been some other ones we've had to work through. We had one situation where a junior advisor left right before transaction closed. And we had to scramble a little bit on putting some protection in place. And we ultimately did not adjust the headline valuation of that offer. We just added a little bit more protection for client retention. So we can work collaboratively with anybody.
I love it.
All right. Great episode. Welcome back, my man. It's so nice to have you here.
We'll see you next time.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Bye.